Announce who our next speaker will be, but I can't do that because I haven't set it up yet, but I will be doing that soon. So look at the website to see who and where that will be. So who our next speaker will be, but I can't do that because I haven't set it up yet, but I will be doing that soon. So I'm getting an echo. Is that anyone else getting that echo?
No, you sound fine.
What?
You sound fine. Keep going.
Oh, okay. Anyway, our speaker tonight is, gosh, I met him a long time ago, and from the get-go, I was totally impressed with how much this guy knows about mushrooms. And the more I've met him and gone on forays with him, it's like even more impressed. It's like guy's from Massachusetts and he knows California mushrooms really well. And then I found out he knows Alaska mushrooms really well. And then Colorado mushrooms really well. And Montana mushrooms really well. It's like, oh my God. So anyway, I think you're all familiar with Noah Siegel, co-author of Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. So with that, Noah, take it away.
Thanks so much, Phil. And hello, FFSC. It's been a while. 2020 was the first year in 11 years, I believe, that I did not make it into California. So I went the whole year without setting foot in the state. It was weird, to see mushroom season happening and not be there. You're just seeing it from a distance. But such has been the last year. That being said, I'm home in Massachusetts. I have satellite internet that doesn't work well when it's stormy out. And we actually had spring thunderstorms today. We went from like a nice 60-degree temperature to now it's what, 28 or something like that now. We had this cold front come through, but luckily the storms have cleared out and I think we'll get through this without a problem. At least I hope so, because usually I have like a backup plan and I didn't make a backup plan tonight, pre-recording talks. And even though I've done who knows how many Zoom talks now, it is really weird talking at a computer. I'll just never, get used to it. The loss of being in front of people and having back and forth it's strange. So I'm looking forward to things getting back to some semblance of normal. Not that mushroom clubs are ever normal. So, but that was my, that's my world, our world. So before I let me just see if I can get every setting where I want it to be. And share the screen. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you have this in slideshow view. Okay. So this talk, I guess, it all comes from, of course, the more you know about mushrooms, the less you realize you know. And I don't know, like if, I used to be able to identify mushrooms. I used to be able to go to forays and put names on stuff. And then it got to the point where I have a hard time doing that. When was the last, I can't remember the last time I put a name like on a Lacaria or an Armillaria, the picture, the mushroom here, Hygrophilopsis. There's just so many mushrooms I won't attempt to name. And so like half the mushrooms I see, I don't know what they are. You're gonna have that whole group of people who tell you what they are, but they'll be telling you incorrect information. And then you'll have that group of people like Elsa who just be like, you'll say a name, she'll just go, no, and shake her head. And then you'll have to realize that, you'll have to think about, why is she saying no? And you start to realize that things are a lot more complex than we give them credit for. When you really start getting into mushrooming and looking at stuff, you'll realize how many of these things the names we're using are incorrect, or that there's species complexes. There's many different species. So I'll try to touch on that a little bit. I want to thank Phil for sending me the Fungus Federation FAIR list, but unfortunately I didn't have time to get that data into a format I could use for this talk. So we're going to have to look at a couple letter clubs data, but that's okay. It's all the same mushrooms, right? So one question I've had is how many species of macrofungi are in California? So macrofungi, are stuff you can see with the naked eye. Kind of ignoring, those Allison Pollock finds that, those are borderline macrofungi. I don't know if with her photographs we could count them, but, past that. So, stuff that's, I would say, over a millimeter. And so, I've been trying to figure out how many species have been documented in California, and it's difficult to put a number on. Going over lists on, so Mycoportal, which is the website which has the Tiberia, the Fungarium list of all collections reported on their sites, like the community science sites like iNaturalist, Mushroom Observer, of course, fungus fairs and show lists from all the California clubs and 4A lists. It gets you to about 4,000 species or 4,000 names. You go over those lists, and there's a whole bunch of names that we know now that they've been misapplied. So it's a list that really needs to be cleaned up. But it's something that I really encourage people who like playing with spreadsheets and names to play around with, try it out, see, if this interests you, get a comprehensive list of all fungi, all macro fungi that have been reported from California. It'd be really curious to see, and it would also be a building block to something to work off of, because right now, like I said, there's very few areas. Of course, California has an amazing checklist for every single plant known in the state and pretty much every location it's known from. It would be nice to have stuff like that for fungi. Dot maps for fungi in this country. So when we're looking at how many species, like I said, about 4,000 species, we'll pull out a couple groups. So with boletes, there's about 65 or so species of, the above ground normal shaped boletes. And it's a group that, Harry Tiers did a lot of work on, more recently, David Aurora. It's a really well-studied group. That being said, there's still a handful of undescribed species in this group. It's probably under 10 now, but when we start getting into those Gastroboletus, there could be a few extra species hiding there. But more and more of these groups are being worked out. The groups that I would say that Chalciparis, the peppery boletes still need work, the Xericomis, the suede boletes, you're going to pull a couple more species out of those. And then the red pored boletes are, there's a paper that David Aurora, Jonathan Frank, and I are working on, and we have a few new species of red pored boletes in California. One of them is just a misapplied name, but a couple that are new ones as well. So, here you have, about counting Sewillis, which, yeah, you can do that, but if you count Sewillis as a bolete, you better count like Progonphus and Gomphidius and all these other things that are more closely related to boletes. There's about 65 species and about 10 or so. So we're going to end up with about 75 species of boletes, not counting Sewillis in California, give or take a few species of Laxinum. That's another whole mess that we won't get into. So, a fairly manageable group. But when we start looking at some of these larger groups that haven't been well studied, or Cortinarius, which, I mean, it's fairly well studied now. I mean, it's more advanced than a lot of groups of agarics, a lot of guild mushrooms, just because, I mean, mostly because of work by the Finns, Kari Limitainen and Tuula Niskanen. So one of the projects that Shannon Adams has been working on with Danny Miller and with help from Joe Ammirati is to try to get a collection and photograph and a sequence of every, as many Cortinarius species as they can find in the Pacific Northwest. And so out of this, so far, at least of a couple months ago, they're a little bit higher than this now, they have 411 sequence confirmed species. So that is sequences for 411 different species of Cortinarius. If we look at that, so Cortinarius, they're one of the harder groups of fungi, I think more because there's not, like for North America anyway, not any like single source to go to identify them. There's a lot of species of Cortinarius that are really easy to identify. Once you learn that species, it is, there's a couple hundred, I would say, out of that 400 that are probably field identifiable, at least to group, which, I mean, try doing that with Dinosabe. For some groups, it would be a lot harder. So Telemonia, these kind of, these hydrophanous, kind of pale brown mushrooms, most of them are brown. There's now 153 sequence confirmed species in the Northwest, 48 of which still are undescribed. So 1/3 of the Telemonia need names. And that when you come down to California, the numbers are even higher than this, because when you get into that oak zone, there's almost no overlap with the oak species. With European stuff. There is quite a bit of overlap with Cortinarius in the conifer zone with conifer-associated Cortinarius in North America and Europe. I'm just trying to, I noticed like the chat thing pop up here, so I'm just trying to adjust it on my screen. So if you have questions, I don't mind being interrupted. You can raise your hand, or I can pause every once in a while, or you can type the question into the chat. And I can, I can respond to them right away like that now that I have the chat box up on my screen. So with this one group, it's, yes, it's the most diverse genus of mushrooms in the world. But so far, what we're going to find is that there's probably close to 500 species in California, because a lot of these Northwest species continue into the northern part of the state. That the oak Cortinarius flora is another whole unique set, and a lot of them they're actually not endemic to California, because a lot of them occur up in Oregon with Oregon white oak, and even into Columbia River Gorge in Washington. But that's a whole separate set of taxa. So looking at these groups, what's going to have to happen to get a handle on this is a lot of people are going to have to pick their group of fungi that they want to specialize in, and pretty much collect every single one of them they see and work on that group. And like it's been done, but using modern taxonomic means, which is sequencing stuff, we'll get a better handle on what we know and what we don't know. But there's a lot of what we don't know. So an example of that, so Humboldt Bay Mycological Society, I think they've had their show for 40 years now, but they had lists for 27 of those years. And out of that, they had just over 1,200 species, or they used just over 1,200 names. I haven't gone over these lists. This list is, I mean, we've actually cleaned this one up a bit. So it's, you know, like the point I'm trying to make here is just because a name is on a list doesn't mean that species was seen there. It's just, you know, a different person can give the same name to, you know, the different name to the same fungus or so. But anyway, to point out here, so 1,200 species, only 7 of these were found all 27 years. Okay, and 623, so over half of them were ID'd at 3 or fewer of those shows. So here is a 1-week snapshot in the year for 27 years. And half of those species were seen at 3 or fewer of those years. So it's really difficult to get a, you know, to get an idea of the biodiversity of fungi when you have these species that don't show up very often. And, you know, you know, I would say that, you know, we have to take this 52% with, you know, a little bit of, you know, there's some caveats to it. One is that, you know, it is just 1 week in the year. So if you have a really cold spell, you're going to get some of these winter species showing up in, you know, they used to have it in early November. Now it's the weekend before Thanksgiving. They had to move the show back a couple weeks up in Humboldt because the rains kept coming later and later and later, and the mushroom season kept coming later and later and later. So they had to change the date of the show. Had a really warm period, you get early season stuff. If you had a really cold period, you get, you know, winter stuff. So that could cut down the number of shows it ends up at. Who's IDing the mushrooms matters, because certain people can go to these shows and identify, like, you know, the year that Elsa shows up, there's going to be a lot more Lepiodes and Leucoagaricus than the year she's not there. And that just, you know, just because she's the only one who can put a name on these things. And you know, there's that, you know, if it's a really good year, typically big stuff gets collected and little stuff doesn't. Except Humboldt's pretty good at pulling in the little stuff. So, you know, like small Mycenas can get buried by big Russellas, so you miss them in that way. But still, I mean, the idea is, you know, you're going to have this set of very common species, but it's going to be small comparison. And so, you know, only about 190 of these things were found over 50% of the years. And so, you know, and so when we look at this, you know, 30% of the species are just have been, you know, a single time in 27 years. And pretty much every single set of, you know, show or fair data that's been going on for 10 plus years will have numbers similar to this. So you'll have, you know, 50% or so of your species will be seen, you know, and so here's an example of, you know, for 27 years, 50% of them have been seen 3 or fewer. So when we look at those species that have been found all 27 years, what are we going to find? We're going to find a couple surprises. Chalciferous piperatus. So this is, you know, the little peppery bolete that's growing with the Amanita muscaria. It's a species complex. We know that now. There's a couple different species, at least 2 different species going by the name, probably more. You know, it needs work. Galerina marginata group, the deadly Galerina. This is one that I was surprised to see on this list. You know, something that's actually shown up all 27 years. And one of the reasons for this is Humboldt always has an edibles and poisonous table, and they have a really dedicated crew that has worked that table pretty much all 40 years. And they really go out of their way to find the deadly poisonous mushroom. You know, up there, it's pretty much just the deadly Galerina. They, you know, until a couple of years ago, Phalloides, you know, death cap was not known from Humboldt County. And the only spot it's known now is far southern Humboldt County. So, Galerina marginata was kind of like their example of a deadly poisonous mushroom. So I think it shows up here because they actually went out of their way to bring it in every single year. That being said, it's a species complex. I know Douglas Smith has done a little bit of work on this, at least 2 species in California. Liophyllum decastes group, the fried chicken mushroom, it just seems like a mess. I haven't seen any work done on Liophyllum. Pleurotus austriatus, that's a catch-all name for 3 or 4 different species. Rhodocolibia, who knows what we have here. Armillaria melia was just a catch-all name for 4 or 5 different species. And then Inocebi geophila was pretty much the name they applied to every single pale Inocebi. So not bad of a list. When we go to 26 or 27 years looking at this, I would say the only 3 species that don't have taxonomic issues, that are actually the correct name are Pibolina sedula, Stropharia ambigua, and Swilloceria lescens. I think probably everything else has some sort of taxonomic issue going on with it. And in some cases, like Caris deliciosus, upwards of 5 species. Russell brevipies is also 4 or 5 different species. So there's a mess there. Another example of this is the Mount Pisgah Fungus Fest, and they really love their list, and they really love trying to get as many species as they can on it. So that's kind of why I think get the species total. And then Humboldt, it's never been about, it's about having a really good display. It's never been about padding species list. But that being said, so Mount Pisgah is the show in Eugene, and it's in a really diverse area because it has the oaks in the valley. They collect from coastal, so the sand dunes in the Oregon coast with shore pine. You have the spruce habitat on the coast. You have the Pacific Northwest mixed conifer stuff in the Coast Range, and you could go up into high Cascades. In a fairly short area, and so it's collected from like 4 really distinct habitats. So high species number, and on their list only 9 species found all 33 years, and pretty much exact same numbers for 56% at 3 or fewer shows, 461 only once. In 2019, which was a really good year in the Pacific Northwest, even so this was year 32. Actually, this was year 33 because they had a myco blitz on INAT last year. There were still 64 species which hadn't been on the list before. So still, that curve continues to go up. And the pie chart, you can see that, you're pretty much looking at the exact same thing. You're looking at 31% instead of 30, just a slightly higher percentage for the 3 years. But, by your year 10 or so, you're looking about 80% of the species are found at 1/3 or fewer of these shows. Their species seen all 33 years was quite different from Humboldt. So, Crogophis tomatosus, not surprising. It is very common in hemlock forest, dominated, hemlock Doug fir in the Northwest. And it has the ability to fruit when it's super dry out or wet. It just will fruit every year. A couple of them that did surprise me was stuff like Hidnellum peckii. I would say it's not common in Oregon. There's spots where you can go find it every year, but it's not a mushroom that you would see all the time. But that being said, it's a really long-lasting fruit body. Phallus schweinitzii, I'm surprised that's not on the Humboldt list, just because that is pretty much everywhere. Lobster mushroom was a little bit of a surprise, but because there's been years where it's not absent, but it's really uncommon to see it. And then other years, it's just everywhere. The Hericium bear's head, I mean, not surprising. You open the High Cascades, it's pretty reliable every year. Ionoporus was a little bit of a surprise, just because it's a drab, nondescript polypore, but it's still, it still came in every year. So if you have any questions, now is a good time to ask them, about any of those numbers. But yeah, I mean, just my point from that is, so here we are spending 30 plus years looking at mushrooms at these shows, and you've come to realize that, you may only see some of these things once or twice over that period. And so how, it makes it really difficult to get a good grasp on like I said, good grasp on biodiversity of fungi when you can go 15 or more years without seeing this species again. Yet it's there and thriving. And an example of that I have is this Neoalbatross ceruleoporus, a beautiful blue. It's not a polypore. But it occurs in mature hemlock forest in the Northeast. There's this one particular spot that it's close to where I live, and I've been there pretty much every single year, multiple times a year since 1987. And I've only seen this mushroom fruiting there 3 times, 1989, 2003, 2011. Now, what 2003 and 11, I don't remember 89, I was 7 back then. But in 2011 were really wet years, some of the best, the 2011 was the best overall mushroom year I've ever seen in the Northeast. I mean, just continuous mushrooms from the beginning of the year to the end of the season, the best fruiting I've ever seen. So here's this unmistakable, fairly large blue mushroom that I've seen in this spot 3 times in 34 years now. And so 31 of those 34 years, there was no sign in this polypore, but on the years that it fruits, there's a lot of it. So it's probably an example of a mushroom that, that just needs a long period of time in between fruiting and conditions to be just right. So when you get those really wet, continuously wet summers here, then it's its chance to fruit. But the rest of the time, it's probably underground. And I used to be able to say it's underground and thriving, but hemlock is being decimated by the woolly adelgids here. So we're losing all of our hemlock habitat. So we're losing all of this mushroom as well. But it just, just goes to show you how hard it is to gauge how common or rare a mushroom is when it could be doing just fine underground and being all over the place, but you only see it every 10 years or so. So that leads to, are they rare or just overlooked species? And what I tell people is a lot of mushroom hunting isn't looking for mushrooms. It's recognizing habitats and going there and picking the mushrooms. So this is Dendroclibia racemosa. This was in Phil's yard. It's a mushroom that once you learn the stature type, the gestalt, there's just something about this mushroom and another group, Pseudobiospora, which I'll show in a second, that's instantly recognizable for a select group of people. And so it's really weird because there's another group of people that could literally stand on this mushroom and never see it. But once you get an eye for it, you just start finding these things everywhere. And so now Elsa and I have this game, like if we're ever mushroom hunting together, it's the first person to find a Pseudobiospora Dendroclibia wins. And we were up in Humboldt a couple of years ago, really dry year. laughing at, maybe this year we won't find him. She steps out of the truck and within 30 seconds she's found one. It took me almost a minute to find one. Where, nobody else could find them. And there's just something about keying your eyes into certain things, the ability to look past the thousands and thousands of mycena fruiting on the forest floor, to notice the cat that's just slightly different, a little bit more opaque, a little bit more convex. And that's a trick that, if you want to find edibles, you really need to pick up, just the ability to scan the forest really quickly and to recognize stuff at a glance, so you don't have to stop and bend over for every single rustler, every single lactarius. You have the ability to walk by stuff. The next thing you like is recognizing the suitable habitats that these species may occur. So if we can pinpoint a species we want to find and say, okay, I will search in that habitat for it, you go find it. And an example of it is, this is another mushroom that exact same day that Elsa found the Pseudobiospora first, she sticks her head into this clump of lady fern. And she goes, aha, here it is. And I was like, here, what is? And she's waving this dead stick. And she said, Mycena terragina. And I was like, what's that? I've never heard of that. And she says, it's this little pink mycena, or peach colored mycena. And I'm like, glancing and I don't see anything. And, there's, if I look closely, there's this mushroom that, it's about a 0.5 millimeter, 3 millimeters across, that she's holding on this little, the dead frond, the stems of the lady fern. And she said, you should look for it. So what I've done since then is every single time I see a clump of lady fern, I stick my head into it. And pretty much every single one of these clumps of ferns in the Pacific Northwest into Northern California has this mycena growing on it. So here's a species that there was no reports from California until Elsa found it. But it's literally on every single clump of a lady fern in a wet area. So once you know what to look for and where to look for stuff becomes more and more common. Or it's seen at least. So if we can do that for these species that we perceive as rare, recognize the habitat type and then go look for them, half these things are going, we're going to say, oh yeah, they're here, we just overlooked them. Another example there, if you look at the stems of sedges, carex species, wet areas, they have another little pink mycena that grows on them, pinkish. It's more, it's white, it's like pinkish cast. But it's on most of these sedge clumps. It's there. And this, the same thing with Dendroclivia racemosa. This species is included on the Northwest Survey and Manage list. And there wasn't, there's not a whole lot of records. But once you get an eye for it, you start seeing this thing all over the place. Once again, Phil's yard. So when I was over at Phil's house, he had a whole bunch of, this is photographed in his yard, just at the end of his driveway. A bunch of Lactarius alnicola, and I picked them up and I was like looking at them, these rotten mushrooms. It was springtime, probably, I think it was probably like February, yeah, it was February, because I was on my way down to Los Angeles for their show. And I noticed all these little, starting off with these little white fuzzy balls, and they went gray, and then the older, more rotten Lactarius had more of these black balls on them. And I just I was like, this has to be the Dendroclivia. And we threw a cluster of that, this whole clump of them off to the side under some oak trees, and came back the next year. And sure enough, there was Dendroclivia coming out of them. But this is a mushroom that a lot of people haven't seen. It's on their wish list of finding it. And when I tell people, if you want to see it, just go. The trick is to if you have a wet year where you have lots of rustle in that area, go back the next year to that area. And just anytime you see a blackening russula or a patch of blackening russulas, just drop to the ground, sit there for a few minutes and look around, and look for these little teeny branch stems. It almost looks like the Myanthemum, what is it? Solomon seal, false Solomon seal, seed heads coming up. These little teeny branch stalks, because half the time I see this, they don't even have caps on them. And I would say that half the time I notice them, it's either I'm on the ground photographing something anyway, or I see these rustles and say, okay, I'm going to stop for a couple minutes and find the Dendrocolibia here. If they're grown up, if the caps are completely expanded, now the capsule is about 5 millimeters across or so they're small. But if it's in a cluster like this, once you get that look down, you can pretty much pick this up, from 5 feet away or so. Just like walking by, you'll just notice this mushroom, and you'll find it. But that just leads back to noticing these finite differences with fungi becomes really important, regardless of what you're looking for. If you're searching for edibles, if you're searching for mycenas versus Dendrocolibia, or whatever you're after, just training yourself of these small finite details to look for is really helpful in finding them. So yeah, if you want to find Dendrocolibia, look for big patches of Licarius Nicola is okay, but the problem with that is it's usually growing in areas that don't get a whole lot of rain anymore. You really need a good soaking rain. So I would say anywhere, on Bay Area north, or actually I would say Santa Cruz north. I've seen the Dendrocolibia in southern Monterey County, north into Alaska. Fairly wide range. Just look for those russulas, Russula brevis as well. Once you find the patch of that, stop, look around, you could find this. Now, while you're looking, and once you get an eye for Dendrocolibia, look for this one. I actually found this before I found Dendrocolibia erismosa. This was on the UCSC campus. Christian and I were out hunting mushrooms. There was an old tan oak snag that had armillaria and hypholoma growing around the bottom of it. And here was this little teeny Dendrocolibia. You'll notice that this one has really short conidial branches on the stem, just like little fuzzy stem, and actually has a larger sclerotia that's misshapen, not the little round balls. So once you get your dendro eye down, look for this thing, and please, please, please collect it if you find it. So once you got the knack for finding mushrooms, you realize that there's like I said, there's a lot more than what meets the eye. And so when I first came out west, I was in California. I was first in California in like 2006. And then back again in 2008. And then 2010, when I really started doing field work, with the idea of eventually doing a book, I started that season up in Washington. And it's the first time I was in Washington. I collected a whole bunch on like the Olympic Peninsula, coming down south. And that year I collected Zeller's bully. There was up in Washington. I come down to California. Christian and I are collecting this thing in Santa Cruz, and I'm just looking at it and I say, Christian, this looks different. And he says, no, you say that about everything. And at that point, I was also stopping and photographing every single red Amanita muscaria I saw, because we don't get red Amanita muscaria here. So he was kind of annoyed with that. And he's just like, there was these crack cap bullies and Zeller's bullies. And, I just like, that it bugged me. But we didn't do anything about it that year. The next year, there was a rather heated disagreement, a mushroom observer, about a cracked cap bolete. So these are the things we used to call boletus, and then Xerocamelus chrysantheron. And there was these so-called experts kind of telling people how to identify them based on pink tones in the cap, and just paying all of the attention to that and nothing else. And Christian's like, we really have to do something about this and figure out what we have here. So I had a handful of collections. He had a handful of collections. We had about 10 or so. We sent them to Jonathan Frank, who did some sequencing, and it came back and it was like, uh-oh, there's a mess here. Because what it showed at that point, not this whole picture, but what it did show was, yes, there was more than one thing being called Zelleri. That chrysantheron, the name chrysantheron was being applied to 5 different things in Western North America. There was names available for some of them. There was pretty much what there was boletus or Xerocamelus chrysantheron for cracked cap bolete. There was the name truncatus, which was pretty much only used by people who used a microscope and noticed the truncate spores. There was a Smith named Amylosporus that Thiers used a couple times, but it wasn't used by anybody else. Rainisii was a species that was described from the Pacific Northwest in 1999 or 2000. Before that, it was called Boletus pulverulentus, the blue staining thing from the East Coast in Europe. The East Coast one needs a new name now. That was the state of Xerocamelus. What we found was that the really common cracked cap bolete is a new species. Xerocamelus, called diffractus. That the name Xerocamelus mendecinensis was actually the Western truncatus. So it's one of the 2 species with truncate spores. Amylosporus, the species described from Idaho, is in California. We have collections from at least Northern California into the Northwest. Rainisii appears to be an old growth dependent thing from the Pacific Northwest. We have no confirmed records from California, but it wouldn't surprise me if something showed up, up in the northern part of the state. And Silicicola was one that Christian first got under willow in Santa Cruz, and it's also Southern California, like wet areas, pretty much always wet areas, but then also started noticing it in urban areas, so planted birch trees. And since we've done the work on this, we realized that it's a lot more common than we initially thought. Once you realize that it's different, the habitat, you start noticing it. And yeah, I will say that probably the most important feature to split these things had nothing to do with the cracking of the cap, the color of the cracking of the cap, but more to do with the amount of red on the stipe and where that red was, and the speed of staining of the pores. So diffractus, usually red just at the base, sometimes bleeding upward, slow grayish blue staining. Mendecinensis, instantaneous dark blue staining on the pores, red pretty much all the way to stipe apex. Amylosporus is kind of in between the 2 of those in both the speed of staining and the amount of red in the stipe, but the stem on that pretty much always discolors brownish as it ages. Rainisii, very little red in the stem and deep, greenish blue to deep blue staining, not quick, but really intense. And Silicicola, lots of red in the stem, fairly slow staining, but wet areas, willow, poplar, birch associate. So different habitat. And then with Zelleri, Zeller's bolete, well, yeah, so it's no longer in boletus, it's in Xerocamelus, but the common and widespread one turned out to be a new species. And so the actual Zelleri, it may be restricted to old growth forest, and it may be, I've only gotten one confirmed collection from California, Mendocino County, and one that I'm like 99% sure, I haven't scoped it or sequenced it, from Humboldt County. And the rest of my collections come from the Olympic Peninsula, like Solduck Valley and Hoh Rainforest, so the old growth forest on the Olympic Peninsula, and a few scattered sites like in the lower Western Cascades of Washington. So, it appears to be a lot more range restricted, and certainly, the spots I've seen are in old growth. So what does this mean? Well, they're really difficult to tell apart in the field from a single specimen. Does it really matter for most people? Probably not. But it could matter for conservation. We could lose Xericomelus zelleri and not know we lost it. Another example of work that that David Aurora did, with Jonathan Frank, was taking the California butter boletes, which Boletus regius, and describing a new genus form, Buteoboletus, and splitting it up into 3 different species. There's the species with oak versus probably conifer associate in the fall, versus the spring montane, fir associated species. So you had 3 different species come out of what was called one, the Appendiculatus, a European species not known to occur in California, a new name for that. And then the Aviaticula, the mountain butter bolete, which is more of a summer fruiting species, also occurs on the north coast with grand fir. So going a little bit further north, the same thing has happened. So blue chanterelles, this is Polyozellus multiplex, that name was just indiscriminately applied to these, distinctive bluish chanterelle-like mushrooms. Andrus Voigt from Newfoundland noticed some differences, got a bunch of other people, like Michael Bugh, Steve Trudell involved, and they did a paper on Polyozellus, and what they found was 5 different species, 3 of which occur in Western North America. But a few of them, really widespread in some of these, Eastern and Western North America and Eastern Asia. Or like Polyozellus multiplex, that's so far only known from Eastern Asia and Eastern North America. So yeah, there could be a lot more dots to fill in here, but it's just another example of it's more complex than we thought. So here are these species that are hiding under our noses, and being morel season, that would have been a really good example to throw in here, but I didn't. Remember 20 years ago when we had 2 species of morels? We had yellow morels and black morels. Now what do we have? We have 25 or so in North America, with a bunch more out there. Or Cantarellus siberius in the late 1990s. We're up to, about 15 species in this group now that were once called siberius, including stuff out west, Cantarellus californicus, Cantarellus formosus. That name's been around for a while. Cascadensis, fairly recently described, bunch of East Coast stuff. But when we look at Cantarellus formosus, who's noticed where you are that they look a little bit different? Are there multiple species here? So when you're on the north coast under spruce, you find this big thing with more of these little chevrons in the stipe, more of a contrasting cap to the hymenophore gill color, and often these little scales, versus stuff like if you're down in Mendocino in the conifer, the Doug fir, for hemlock zone, you're finding this thing here, this more slender one with a little bit more beigey colors. I've got this thing up north a few times in these tan oak forests, and I just like nicknamed it tan oak gold. And North Coast pallid, this is another one of my tag names for these things. This is just something that, if you're up in Humboldt, Del Norte County, you'll come across every once in a while. Are they all the same species, or are they different? It needs work. That this group needs to be looked at closer and figure this out. Is there variation in this species, or are there multiple species here? If you want to see groups that need more work, all you have to do is type a name into iNaturalist and look at the variation in the photographs here. So Hygrophilopsis, the false chanterelles, probably, there's at least 5 different species out west for what's being called Hygrophilopsis aurantiaca, the false chanterelle. And so when you look at these things side by side, you'll start noticing that. You'll start noticing that, yeah, there are differences here. So, Hygrophilopsis have these really closely like wrinkled gills that fork repeatedly. So you can see it comes out, forks, 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 forks. And it's a feature that, a lot of them have. So is this thing that's growing in wood chips of more red color, is this rufa, a European species, or is it something distinct? There's the more brown cap one with pallid gills. There's this really little pallid colored ones. There's a bunch of different species there, but it's going to take one of you to document this, to go out there and collect it and work them up. Or you can just call them all false chanterelles and move on. That's your choice. But with the Xericomelus, we ended up collecting over 200 collections of them, photographing a bunch more, and pretty much stopping and looking at every single one of them before we got to a point where you said, okay, I think I have ways I can tell all these apart in the field. And then every once in a while, I get handed a Zelleri/Atropurpureus, and it's like, no, I can't tell these things apart. Not until you stick them under a microscope. And you have to look at the cap cuticle on that when the spores overlap. So, like I said, when you look closer at stuff, you're going to realize that it's frustrating because you get to the point where, yeah, I won't put a name in a Hygrophilopsis. Chances are I won't put a name on a golden chanterelle in the Pacific Northwest. I definitely won't put a name in a golden chanterelle in Eastern North America now. It just, you can't do it based on current knowledge. So when you start, like I said, when you start looking closer, or you know what to look for, you can start finding stuff. So this group, Pseudobaospora, I mentioned it earlier, it looks sort of like a Dendrocolibia. It looks close enough to a Dendrocolibia, it has these stragos, these stiff hairs at the stem. Mushroom expert, Michael Cole's website had a picture of a Pseudobaospora up there for a while called a Dendrocolibia. I think he's finally taken it down. But they have a look to them. It's kind of this opaque cap with this extra, powdery, it's not powdered, this frosted look. The margins are often like slightly incurved or curled. Most of them have those stiff hairs, the stem base, most of them are fairly small. But it was a point that there was no species described from California until Fred Stevens found this species and brought it to Dennis A. Chardin, who described it as Pseudobaospora stevensii. So that was the first one. Their Pseudobaospora alpina was one that was brought in at a Point Reyes mycoblitz on a really dry year. Elsa noticed it and said, this is a Pseudobaospora, and described that one. Pseudobaospora decori is one that Christian described, found on the UCSC campus. This purple clustered one. And so here was a span of in 8 years going from no pseudodiospora known from documented from Western North America to 3 described species. So once I got an eye for finding them and started looking for them and understanding the habitat they would occur in, up to 14 different species now in Western North America. So here's an example of like, once you can clue in what to look for, you start noticing them, you start finding them. So can we do this with other groups? Can other people, can you find a group that you're going to make yours and say, okay, I'm going to go look for this thing and kind of know what it looks like. I can get a good grasp on what species we have here. We still haven't described any of these other ones. COVID's kind of put a stop for that because I actually have a plan now to get some of these things described. Some of them I don't have enough, only have a single collection of this one, but actually someone found this up in Mendocino this year. This is another one I only have a single collection of, these 2 on the bottom. So if you see anything like these, collect them. Let's get names on these things. So is it going to be too difficult to put names on mushrooms in the future? Because, I keep saying that, I can't do it. And I think that, what's going to happen is we're going to have field guide names for stuff. Or group names. We're going to call something Russell brevities group, the short stock Russell group, and have to be okay with that because we are not necessarily going to be able to tell the difference of these things in the field. In some cases we will, in some cases we won't. So with the Lecturius deliciosus group, well, we now know that Lecturius deliciosus is not known to occur in North America. That's not to say it's not here, it's just not documented from here. We have a whole lot of things that get called Lecturius deliciosus in North America, and most of them still need names. In California, there's been a couple described, Aurantiosauridus and Estivus are 2. Aurantiosauridus north coast with spruce, Estivus is with hemlock and fir. But then there's other ones, this thing is Deliciosus variety Picea, Sensu Smith, Deliciosus variety areolatus. This is the Deliciosus variety Determinus, Sensu Methman. So there's these, these variety names to them, but they're not, because they're not deliciosus, they all need new names. So if you want to have like common names for all of these things, as you can tell, I am not a fan of eating them. That's okay. Some people are, and I keep putting up this slide because especially if Chad Hyatt's around, I'm waiting for someone to cook these mushrooms for me so that I actually like them. It's a challenge now. I'll stop beating a dead horse with this slide when someone finally makes a meal that I enjoy with these crappy, delicious Melkies. So with that, I am going to give a quick plug to Mushrooms of Redwood Coast. If you don't know this book, 608 pages, 768 species, 869 pictures in this book. It was up to date until March 6th, 2016. There's been a handful of changes since then. And a couple things I now know are misidentified, such as life. But if you want this book, it is the Kindle version of it is on Amazon right now for $2.99, which is a ridiculous low cost. And I am just trying to share the screen. For $2.99, you can have this on your any electronic device you have. So it can actually be a field guide. You can bring it in the field. You can have it on your computer. Say you want to look up a Cortinarius, you can jump to that chapter and go right down the list. For people who complain about font size of the book, you can play with everything here. You can change the font. You can make it bigger. You can make your columns wider. There's a lot you can do, and you can zoom in on photos. And I don't know why it's so cheap right now, but it's only about $20 for the Kindle version. Grab it while you can for $3. So with that, thank you, everybody.
Noah, what's your take on a $3 book?
I mean, I don't. Maybe they're it's like the bargain bin. I mean, digital once they've made it, it costs nothing to duplicate it. But you know, for years I wasn't going to buy it because you know the publishers couldn't give us a free copy of the Kindle book. You know, you actually had to go on Amazon and buy it for, you know, it's been like, usually the Kindle version's been between like $18 and $21. And I went on that day and there it was for $2.99. And I don't know how long that's going to be the case. So I finally bought it, you know, I bought it. I can now have the book on my phone in the field. So if someone needs to dispute me on some idea, I can say, look, it's in the book.
But you could do that from memory.
I could, but people don't believe my memory. It's funny, I've actually used it back when I did online mushroom arguments. I've kind of gotten away from that lately. I've matured, I guess. There was multiple times where I said, well, you know, mushrooms are right what Coase says, or the soon to be published, I have a copy here of the soon to be published mushrooms are right what Coase, and it says this, and people are like, oh, if it's in a book, it must be real. So,
but they won't believe you.
No, it's actually funny. There was, what was it, last year? No, maybe it was 2 years ago. It must have been 2 years ago. Last year didn't exist. There's this Russian woman in the Puget Sound Club, and like she asked me like the edibility on a mushroom, and I told her pretty much word for word what it said in Mushrooms of Redwood Coast. And she's like, yeah, I'm gonna Google that. I'm gonna look it up. And she looks it up and she reads back like the exact edibility thing I had in the book to me and said, yep, it says here that it's edible, but the stems are too tough. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess you can believe that source.
She didn't get the fact that you wrote the book?
She knew. It's different to see it in print and hear it from somebody.
Oh,
You never know, maybe Christian wrote it.
So Noah,
Could
after
be.
you've given us this lovely presentation about what we know, we don't know, and then you follow it up with here, buy this book, which has a species, which may not be the name by the time we find it, right? Interesting follow-up, I just thought.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty, like, if we didn't know in the book, we didn't make up names. And that's been the really frustrating thing about a lot of editor books, is using names that are known to be wrong, or pretending you know what's actually going on. I mean, I have no problem saying I don't know what something is. There's a lot of mushroom people who don't seem to have that ability, and will give you a name regardless. There's certain things like, you know, you know, some of the tag names in the book, Hebeloma megacarpa, which is now albomarginatum. Let me just share it real quick here. So this is the hebeloma that I called big scaly in the book, because it's a big scaly hebeloma. You know, I could actually search for this thing. So you know, it was a mushroom that I wasn't confident in putting a name on. I mean, so this is something that would have been called Hebeloma insigni in all other field guides. You know, and I said, you know, I don't want to use that name because I don't think it's right. And so, you know, I just nicknamed this thing Hebeloma big scaly because it's a really large mushroom. I mean, it can get, you know, well, what do I say, 22 centimeters. I've actually found it bigger since. My print copy has all the markups. So that's another thing that you know, all these descriptions in the book are describing mushrooms as we saw them, not copying previous work. So it's, you know, pretty much going out there and you know, if we found mushrooms, you know, writing a description of them when we saw them and you know, working off that, or at least notes when we found them and collected them. So anyway, this thing, you know, when Henry Becker looked at this collection, first it matched something from Michigan called Megacarpum, and now it actually matches something else, an older name, Albomarginatum. So this thing has a name, Hebeloma albomarginatum. In other cases, you know, I was, you know, I used a group cop out. So, you know, Hebeloma crystalliniforme group. Well, this thing photographed here, this thing pictured here is Hebeloma volutipes. And I can go back and say that because, you know, I have the collection of it. And I sent it to Henry Becker, who was working on Hebeloma, and he, you know, he studied this mushroom and said, you know, this one's volutipes. Most of what you find in California that you call crustuliniforme, it's like 4 or 5 different things. Crustuliniforme is in California, but volutipes is the most common one in that group. So it's, you know, it's kind of like where we're heading for field guides. If you want to be correct on a lot of these things, you are going to have to, you know, use group. Or be really detailed in how you tell this particular species, volutipes from crystalliniforme, from calbatum versus, you know, limbatum. It's endless.
Yeah. Noah, do you have
Yeah.
any plans to update the page on your companion website where you have, you know, new names and errata and things like that? As the names come in.
Christian mostly does the website. I can bug him with a few things. There hasn't been too many changes. Part of the reason for that is we were kind of like, you know, knew what a lot of the stuff that was coming up, you know, knew the people working on these things and what was going to happen. And part of the thing that, you know, like, I don't know, like California mushrooms, which was, they didn't have a chance to change any names after a first manuscript submission. So they had like 20 some name changes before the book was even published. 10 Speed Press allowed us to make changes until the final day, you know, before it was sent to the printer. And so there was a bunch of stuff that in that 14 or so months that between, it was 11 months between first manuscript description, you know, first manuscript and then final print review, that we were able to change stuff.
So
Fairly short list.
10 Speed is no longer doing books, so you got to look for a new publisher for the next book.
Yes, we need a new mushroom book publisher. So if you know of any, because we currently don't have one.
Bummer.
University of Texas. Yeah, I guess University of Texas Press does them.
We actually talked to them about, Mushrooms in the Redwood Coast. They didn't want to do it because they felt it was too specialized. They were more interested in doing like, Ascomycetes in North America,
Yeah.
Tricholomas in North America.
Right, okay.
Never mind the fact that Mushrooms in the Redwood Coast has sold thousands and thousands of more copies than both of those books combined.
Yeah.
And those books are heavily subsidized by private donations to make them viable.
Mm-hmm. And they're expensive.
Yeah.
Noah, what are your current sales? Just curious. How many books have you
I
sold?
don't know. I haven't looked in a while. It's probably 14,000 or so now. Yeah, I really don't. I haven't checked. I get royalty statements like twice a year, and I'm supposed to get one. I probably get one next week or so. So I haven't looked in over 6 months, or about 6 months, and so most of the sales happen November, December, January. We have that, the peak of coastal mushroom season, and it's like, 1 or 2. I do know that with the Kindle version, which all counts as copies, we made it into like the #1 mushroom book and in the top 2,000 selling Kindles editions on Amazon.
Amazon shows you #1 bestseller in outdoor and nature.
There you go.
And certain people
We
know.
actually get a fairly good percentage of the digital version for royalties. If it's sold on Amazon, I think we get about 70 cents each for a print copy. The royalties on a digital version are 25%, split to 2 of us. So you don't make any money from doing these books. But so if you buy this, I will get 70 cents. If you buy it on Amazon. If you buy it from a bookstore, I'll get closer to $1.
Oh, you're getting rich. My God.
Yeah.
Well, Noah, you already got my $70 cents from the paper copy, and I just got the Apple book version for $2.99 and intend to take that with me to the field. So I hope you can make your boat payment this week. And thank you for putting all that work together for that, for real.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to sell books out of your trunk while you're in Massachusetts.
Yeah, but even on that, first of all, I really don't like doing it. I don't like selling myself. I can't stand self-promotion. And so I find that aspect really hard to do. That's one thing. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so if I bought the book and I had it if I shipped it to Santa Cruz, I'm going to pay 50% of the list price. So I'm going to pay $17.50 for the book, and then it's about 11%, 12% tax, depends where you ship it in California, sales tax on that. And so at that price, it's usually about $20 and change, or somewhere around there. It's usually on Amazon for like $19 to $21. So I could buy it direct from the publisher to sell it to consumers for the same price people could get it on Amazon. So, people like, we had no problem selling it, like the Santa Cruz Fungus Fair. But a lot of shows, it got to a point, if I had it at 35, a lot of people would look at it and just go buy it online. So I started, so I sell it for about $30, which means I make $10 from the book sale. but then the fact is that a case of them, 8 books, weighs 34 pounds. They take up a lot of space, and if you're flying somewhere, actually, like I had, I just put a case into a backpack and checked it on, on a flight I was doing, and the baggage handler, picks up the bag, not expecting it to weigh anything, and almost gives herself a hernia from lifting this thing up, because and they're super dense. And if you put them in your carry-on, it looks like a bomb, I guess, when
I
when it
know.
goes through that,
I found
because
out.
it's solid. So if you have it in your bag will get searched every single time.
Yeah.
It's gotten to the point, like if I'm on TSA pre, I pull, and I have books in my bag, I pull it out of the bag, because they're going to, if I don't, they are going to look in that bag.
Well, I'm just glad that I have a digital version, because I find I'm going to use my book a lot more on the Kindle than if I'm hauling the books. I always forget to haul the, to grab the book when I go traveling. So this could be perfect. In a lot of ways, I think you'll get a lot more publicity, because people will be going, "Oh, where'd you get that information?" I'm like, "Right here on my Kindle." And so, word of mouth, you're going to get a lot of sales from people just having that on their phones.
Yeah, and that's been like the frustrating point of, people saying it's not a field guide. And I've been telling people for years that if you carry a phone in the woods, it's a field guide. Mm-hmm. I mean, just because, the book is available on the phone, and on the phone, you literally can zoom in on these photographs, zoom way in. I'll see if I can, just pull it up real quick and show people. So it's not like, it's not like the book, which has, it has fairly small photographs. If you're trying to see detail on these smaller photographs, it's not easy sometimes. And the first time I saw the digital version it was on somebody's iPad, and you make full page on that iPad, and these things, they look pretty good. So, so that's the photograph on the phone.
Wow.
Nice.
So if it just for the fact that you can get these pictures a lot bigger and in great detail, it's worth getting. Or you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks tomorrow for $4 or whatever. I don't know. I've never had Starbucks coffee, so I can't tell you what it costs. Your choice. And like I said, I don't know how long it's going to be this cheap. So,
have you been thinking about making keys?
No, not really. I know we have to.
But may I suggest team up with the Danes and make these nice color wheels and have it that way? That is really
so
very nice and doable.
If you haven't seen the book Fungi of Temperate Europe, you have to go get that book, because it sets the standard for what a mushroom book should be like.
Yes, it's heavy, but
it is a bit heavy, but you can get a digital version.
Elsa,
Fungi
what's the book?
Temperate Europe.
Fungi of
Temperate Europe. It's
temperate Europe. Okay.
Yeah, I've got it. Great set, some pictures. Yeah.
And 2 nice authors, almost as nice as the ones from the Redwood Coast.
Hey Noah, will you talk about maybe how you got into mushroom hunting and identifying mushrooms? Because I'm a super beginner. I've had it for maybe a few years now. My friend Dave Sims, who's also on this call, myself, we met with Phil and the club members many times. But what's really stopping me is, for one, I feel Latin is not as intuitive as that of English to learn. For 2, there just seems to be it's enormous quantity of different varieties of mushrooms. It's so daunting to be able to begin to do something, to sort out something like that in your brain. I have problem making choices between two things. And now there's like 6,000 different variety of things. It just seems like really challenging. What are some of the good practices for beginners?
Yeah, I mean, that's so one of the things that's beginning to frustrate me more and more is the pushback against common names, again, from a lot of the more serious mushroom people. In order to gain more popularity and more accessibility, I think we need more common names for fungi. I mean, you wouldn't believe the flack I've gotten from some people for some of the common names that we made up for stuff in the Red Book Coast book, because there's some really common mushrooms that don't have common names. So just in terms of remembering names and stuff, you'll slowly pick up scientific names, just the more you use them. But it's not as easy. But then there's also like these common names that iNaturalist uses, and people are like saying, I saw this such and such, a scruffy twiglet, and I'm just like looking at them blankly. And I mean, there was an attempt a while back with NAMA to make like standardized common names for fungi. Something like that will have to happen, or at least regionally in this country. Which, I mean, certainly a group of people from California could get together and say, that these things are going to have these common names. And then, yeah, I mean, what got me interested, it wasn't birds. And I had an older brother who was a birder, and I couldn't compete with him, so I needed something different. And mushrooms were the perfect choice. So I kind of got hooked on them as a kid, and then before I realized it, I mean, I didn't personally mature. I'm still a kid, but I was older and knew too much to give up. And yeah, I mean, just what drives me is I guess the curiosity. I want to have the ability to put a name on everything I see. I used to joke that my life goal is to know every single mushroom. I will never get there. I'm coming to terms with the fact that I'm gonna fail at my life's goal. It's okay, right? But
Definitely okay for me.
I just want to know what everything is, and not necessarily just mushrooms. I want to know what everything living is. I don't care whatever X celebrity is up to this week. I just want to know what every living organism is, and mushrooms take up a majority of that time.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I have trouble placing names of friends that I see frequently. Instead, I don't know, mushrooms that I haven't seen before. So I've given up on that game a long time ago. But thank you for sharing that. I share some of that curiosity about things that occur to in our nature and all around us, and it's fascinating to discover their habits, their environment, their family, in mushrooms. And so it's been really cool. And your book has been a tremendous guide for my friends and I in that process.
We now have
Oh, this is Lee. How has these changes of names of species within, let's say, in North America, affected, or has it affected the naming of the mushrooms that look alike, somewhat like the ones in the European? Because before you travel to Europe or anything like that, you can say, oh, this is an Amanita muscaria, this is a so-and-so, and everybody you may not speak the language, but the mushroom is, everybody's shaking their head, yes. But now when we come up with some of these other obscure mushrooms with all these different species within a grouping, how is that being affected?
there's no easy answer to that, I think, because I mean, in certain cases, it's a single species that's really widespread. You know, like I was saying earlier, with like these quaternarias, there's a lot of quaternarias that occur pretty much across the northern temperate zone. You know, conifer forests across, you know, Europe, Asia, North America. In terms of like, you know, like golden chanterelles, I mean, you can still call it, you know, you can call it Cantarellus siberius group, or you can just call it golden chanterelle. I mean, I think just the way we communicate things, you know, any group or complex will take care of that issue. If you want to be technically correct. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, like with fungi, I don't think we ever really gave them enough credit for how complex they are. You know, if you, the example I like using is when you look at plants. So when we had, you know, all these early plants being described in North America, they were all being described as new. But we had European botanists coming over here and describing every single plant here as new. When the fungi were you know, when Peck was working on North American fungi, that wasn't the case. Half the names he was applying to stuff was European stuff, but we didn't have European mycologists coming over here and working on stuff and looking at these things and saying they were different. We had these really brief, you know, 8-10 word descriptions of this mushroom. And that was, you know, that was the description. Nowadays, when we have, you know, unlimited colored photographs and sequence data, it just allows, you know, it's a lot more tools you can use to like put these things side by side and start to notice, you know, additional differences to them. But in terms of communicating it, you know, call it a fly agaric. You know, use that common name for 10 different species.
Very good, Noah. Yeah. Well, that was kind of common in Italy, what, you know, 20 years ago, when go to the markets there, and it was all the Boletus that were out there, you know, they all called them porcini, and there was at least three species that was being called porcini.
Yeah.
And this was porcini was certified by the government, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and that's perfectly okay, I think, to, you know, to have, you know, to call every single black morel here a black morel. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ones, but, you know, if you want to start, I think it was a few years ago, I gave my morel talk for FFSC. You know, if you really want to key in on like different habitat types, you can find different species of morels. You know, if you go, you know, if you go to a burn, you're going to find one set of species. If you go back to that burn 3 years later, you're going to find different species growing there. So there, you know, there's just like small differences that if you stop and look at stuff closer, you'll just start noticing. But in terms of like, how do you communicate that? It becomes harder and harder. You know, like I said, harder and harder to be able to put names on mushrooms when you realize the complexity of them.
Thank you. Yeah, it is difficult. Thank you.
No, that was
And it's gotten to the point where I'm perfectly willing to not put names on mushrooms anymore.
Well, it didn't stop Gary Linkoff when he was doing the Audubon one. He was putting common names and just putting them on there.
Sorry, Elsa, you said?
I totally agree with you. I can't give names to mushrooms either. Well, I can't anyway. So with too much knowledge is a bad thing.
Bad thing. Yeah. I guess one of the examples is I just did a bunch of work for IUCN red listing of fungi. And so my criteria for the species that I was going to do was they had to be endemic to Western North America, And there couldn't be any taxonomic issues, like glaring taxonomic issues with them. And I had a really hard time coming up with 100 species. Like a really hard time. You know, it's like I was like flipping through mushrooms and Robocosa, and it's like, nope, 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 nope. I mean, so in some cases, it's like that name's used elsewhere, and that name, you know, they're using that name incorrectly. You know, like this name being applied in Mexico or something like that. But you know, just using that criteria of endemic to Western North America and no taxonomic issues, you wouldn't believe how difficult that is now. And so, you know, we should be looking at this and, you know, why is this still the case? Why aren't we fixing this? But we're not. I mean, mushroom taxonomy doesn't pay.
So I just recently sent some stuff in to be sequenced and came back with it's not in the banks anywhere, so it's going to be a new mushroom. Have you ever had the experience of having to name a mushroom before?
Yeah, and so I mean, the first thing I would say is just because the sequence doesn't match anything does not mean it's not described. It means that there's no sequence of that particular species. You know, could mean that there's no, you know, sequence of that particular species. A lot of that depends on the group that you're working on. Some groups have been really well sequenced, some haven't. So you know, because your sequence doesn't match anything, I mean, it tells you something, but it doesn't tell you that it's a new species. Pretty much to describe something, you have to know that group well enough, or know somebody who knows that group well enough who's willing to work with you, to know every species it potentially could be, and that the fact that it's not them. And then, you know, you would write the full description of it, both, you know, macro and micro, and then pretty much you can't publish now without you know, sequence data, some sort of phylogeny with it. And so you would do all of that, and you would, you know, present your you know, species for publication. There's some quick pub ways that some people do, you know, online publishing through Index Form, stuff like that. I'd rather people didn't do it that way, but each to his or her own, or their own. Yeah.
Noah, two questions. One is, how does this dilemma differ from other areas of science? So if we were talking about fish instead of mushrooms, for example, and how to find a new species of fish and what you have to go through to do that, that would be a process that you described in terms of how to do that with mushrooms, right? And
yes.
And then the second question is, does DNA sequencing get us out of all of this? As that technology gets better, you can certainly tell one thing from another, and whether or not they are the same or different, down to an incredibly detailed level, can't you?
No, I mean, DNA does not get us out, and in some cases it just makes it more muddled. So if you believe in evolution, it's a continuum, right? You know, it's everything is still evolving at all times. So you're always going to have the question of, like, where do you draw that line?
All right. Good. Great.
And
great
some
point.
people are willing to draw at a you know, really broad brush, and some people are you know, willing to split hairs or 4 base pairs. So yeah, I mean, DNA is just, it should be viewed as an additional tool to go along with all the morphological features. You know, you have the whole combination of stuff. I think one thing that's really underlooked in terms of mushroom taxonomy is ecology of stuff. I think that, that ecology matters a lot more than we've given it credit for. And there's mycologists in California who can't tell the difference between a fir tree and a pine tree. Identifying, just like what these things are growing with, where they're growing, like all those Lycarius deliciosas. The easiest way to split a lot of them is knowing what tree it's growing with, because they have fairly specialized hosts. So if you're finding with pine, it's not going to be the same one that's growing with fir and hemlock. It's not going to be the same one that's growing with spruce. So just by recognizing stuff like that is really useful. But in terms of I guess mushroom taxonomy the best thing to compare it with is entomology, insect taxonomy, just because there's so many of them, so few known. But there was a new bird species described recently, and it made national news. So boo-hoo. There's just so few birds, and they're so easy.
They don't sit still, and they've got colors. They're hard.
But people get offended when you eat them.
I was going to say they're all edible, so who cares? Well, almost all are edible. There are a few poison birds.
But can you imagine if I went to the bird club and every time I saw a bird, I asked if I could eat it? Why is that okay in mushroom clubs?
Go to the Rock and Gem Club and see how well that goes over.
Yeah, of course you can eat it.
Yeah, but while we're at it, my other complaint is, can you imagine me going to a botany meeting and putting mushrooms out all over the place? I mean, why do slime mold people think it's okay to stick slime molds on mushroom tables?
Because they're cool.
They're cool, but they're not in the same kingdom.
Nope.
Yeah, but if we didn't do it, then who would?
The slime mold people, they can have their own slime mold get
They
together.
could have their own slime mold groups. Yeah.
Imagine a slime mold fair.
I would love a
can all-
slime mold fair. I'd
They
show
can
up
all
for
get
that.
together and race across some cardboard together.
Yeah, but it's only a matter of hours, guys.
Well, I personally think that edible versus non-edible is a pretty good base cut for what I want to know about mushrooms, and then delicious versus palatable becomes the next base cut, and then looking at how to find some of those things in my neighborhood or in neighborhoods that I'm familiar about is another way that I organize my thinking about foraging, but that's may just be me.
You're talking to the wrong presenter, though.
Missed the whole point.
I understand. I mean, that's something that I've come to terms with is that, if I want to pay my bills through the mushroom world, I have to talk to people about edibility and stuff, because that's really what gets people in the door. But my hope is that, we can get 1 out of 100 through the next door. Because people like Douglas Smith, he got started eating chanterelles. He loves his chanterelles. If you want to ask Douglas about chanterelle edibility, he will go on for hours about that, but then he will also go on for hours about Galerina. But it's just, it's getting people like that through the door with edibility, because foraging, it's really popular. It gets them out there, and then their interests are open to a world that's much bigger. That's a lot more complex. Once you go down that rabbit hole, you never know where it will lead you.
Exactly.
Well, no, I got your commitment to the study of the science and the different species for the mushrooms, right? But I whether something is edible is something someone always asks me, always. And the way I see it is that it's the connection that actually draws people to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And there's been many people that I've brought to mushroom hunting with me, or these things, that once they start understanding these mushrooms, they actually begin to explore the science behind it and get themselves involved and develop this love for nature and love for the environment, which eventually leads to a conversation about conservation and habitat restoration and everything else that we truly all care about. So it's been an amazing connection and experience with people.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, we have to use edibility of fungi as a gateway drug to get them hooked.
No,
It's true.
And once that happens, that and there's going to be the people that there's going to be the group of people that, like me, who, I mean, I do not eat mushrooms, and I really don't care about eating them. And I know people are surprised and find this hard to believe, but I have zero interest in eating these things.
Edibility is only one of 1,000 gateways
Yeah.
to this. Cultivation would be a second one. But the diversity of the species, the amount of time that mushrooms have been on the planet, you mentioned evolution early on. There are so many ways to build that audience and constituency, and you are a great advocate for it, and I thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Richard.
I got lured into mushrooms because my parents are both avid photographers. And so I learned about mushrooms as wonderful subjects for photography, never realizing that you could actually eat them. I found that out later, and then I got hooked.
That's another great example.
Yeah. And that's something to celebrate, all different many things that bring even just this small group of people together over such a diverse, background and interests and everything. So really awesome to see. So Noah, what are some of the projects that you're working on next?
So the plan is to do a Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast style book for Pacific Northwest, with about 40-45% different species in, and then rewriting like ecology section touching up the descriptions for the other ones. The Sierra Nevada book, but you need rain in California. Literally, like, even when mushrooms around the coast, it's like, in 10 years, I worry, it's like, these are the mushrooms that used to be on the Redwood Coast. With how quickly the changes are happening, like I was saying earlier, there really hasn't been a great summer season in Sierra Nevada since 2011. And so when I'm waiting for that period where I can get out there and get photographs of, all these summer fruiting species, I still don't have some of the species we need photos of. I try to keep a period open in the summer where I can run out there with a moment's notice and do it. But it hasn't happened lately. There's been a couple okay periods, but not great fruitings. What else? I have to do a bunch more scientific publications. I'm actually working on Guyana cornarius right now with Terry Henkel and Kathy Ames material, publishing 7 new species from there, and then do the Cameroon cornarius once that one's done. And hopefully I'll get back to travel. I will say that I mushroom stuff has taken a back burner in at least except for the IUCN work, the last 6 months or so, because I've had to pay bills in different ways. So I just haven't had my mushroom work lately.
What is it that you do during the day? What is it that you do as a profession?
I did old house restoration work for years before mushroom stuff became full time, and I've gone back to that now.
Okay.
So
Forest
Oh,
restoration?
Weren't you doing
old house restoration. I worked 1800 colonial houses, was period like that, and did restoration work on them, restoration and renovation.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
No, we're
Completely unrelated to
in New
fungi.
Zealand?
The New Zealand stuff, yeah, that's which has been put on hold for a couple of years now. I was couple of years ago, for 2 straight years, I was in New Zealand collecting and photographing fungi for a reference guide for New Zealand fungi. So I have like 1,100 or so collections in 2 years from that, probably 800 different species or so I photographed in that period. I was planning on going back last year and this year, but of course that didn't happen. Maybe next year. So.
Busy.
Hey Noah, can you sign my app?
Yeah, I mean, it's been strange not traveling. Because a normal year for me, I was away from home 7 or 8 months out of the year.
What about baking bread? That involves fungus.
Not a bread eater.
Oh,
You gotta kill your fungi for that, though. I'm not an alcohol drinker either, so I really do not consume fungi.
Well, if it helps,
Yeah, I eat very little bread and I don't drink. So
well, if it helps, Noah, it's supposed to rain on Sunday.
I've been eyeing it because I mean, reports I've heard, especially from up north, is that it's really bad. Southern Oregon. I just got a report from there. I got a report from Corvallis area that it's awful. I was hoping if it gets good in late May or early June, I'll come out. But it has to get good enough to justify doing that. I think I'll probably go because so right now, I mean, I have nothing booked until September. Just there's all the stuff I was supposed to be doing now didn't happen. So it looks like I'll have a couple free months this year. And I'm thinking of doing a southeast trip, Florida, Gulf Coast. There's a lot of unusual stuff down there.
One of the things that we miss with this virtual Zoom meeting shit is that we don't get to take the speaker to dinner. So if you get here, I'll find a way to get you to dinner with a bunch of partisans, and you won't have to do any presentation.
I'll get back there.
We'll keep that in mind, would you please?
Yes, I will get back there eventually. Especially if it rains, if Phil posts a photo from his yard with lots of mushrooms, I typically have the ability to show up rather quickly in an area that has mushrooms.
Best.
Okay, everybody.
It's 9, so
That
It's
was,
way past my bedtime.
Yep.
I'll bet.
same here.
Late there. All right.
Thanks, Noah.
thank you for a
All
great
right,
talk.
thank you so much,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thanks, Noah.
Thank
Good seeing
you.
you
Terrific
again.
work. Terrific work, Noah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for organizing this.
everybody.
Oh, thanks, Justin.
What's up?
Thank you, Dan, Phil, and everyone for organizing this. That was really fun.
Good seeing you again, Peter.
So you getting any rain, Dan?
We had about 4 days of good rain, but
Yeah, good to see you, Phil.
dry again. And we had like about, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches of rain in a series of storms. But I went out today and all I found was little tiny stuff, except for the mosquitoes.
Because Phil's still looking for a program for next month.
Oh, no, not enough here. But, oh yeah, that's right. Next month is election.
Doug
Yeah.
Smith's in the room.
What's
Good
that?
speaker.
Yep.
Are you posting things on the website?